Life doesn't stop while on vacation. Neither do medical issues, accidents, or worse. We are going to ask the questions others won't, so you can protect yourself and your family.
Hey everybody, John Chow, the Cruise Addicts here, and so glad to have you all here. We want to thank everybody that's watching us live, and also if you're watching a replay of this at another time, we're so glad to have you here. Today we're going to talk about something that people don't really talk about, the dangers it's actually on cruises. It's wet decks, slippery steps, and also the science behind a simple fall. Is it really that simple? I know I've been on cruises with my family and little kids are running, and sure enough, one takes a fall on a slippery deck. Also, there's hazards that we've actually talked about before, hot decks. So all these things as far as having the proper footwear, these different things. I even saw something I want to bring to Tom, those thresholds. A lot of times between the thresholds of the doorways on ships, a lot of times there's doors that actually are watertight. So they're not like something you'd see in your house. This is actually a huge vessel, and there's things that actually can hurt you that you might not be aware of that you deal with in your everyday life. So I'll hold off explaining it more, but so glad to have you here. Please give us a like, give us a thumbs up, give us a comment. We really appreciate it. We read every comment, so we love your feedback. My guest today, of course, is Tom Scolaro. His legal career spans over 25 years, and he's the founding partner of Scolaro Law in Miami, which specializes in personal injury and has handled many high-profile cruise and maritime cases. To most, a cruise ship is a floating resort, of course. We all love them. That's why you're here. To Tom, it's a jurisdictional puzzle, a liability minefield, and often a trap for the unprepared. So we're going to actually help you be prepared here. He's gone up against the biggest names in the industry and won cases that weren't supposed to be winnable. The kind of cases where the injuries are horrific, the law is obscure and anti-consumer, and the companies are betting the victim won't fight back. But not with Tom on your side. We're going to get Tom in here. He's going to actually bring us up to speed as far as these wet decks, slippery steps, and the science behind the simple fall. Hi, Tom. How are you today?
Hey, good afternoon, John. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I know there's a lot to say, a lot of words there, right? Slippery decks, wet decks. But like I was saying, it just seems like the other day I had my young daughter. We're on a cruise where she's running. She wants to go up to the water slide, because these ships have water parks on them now. I mean, they're huge. And that just kind of adds to the complexity of further having problems, right?
It does. When you think about a sort of in our general day-to-day experience with swimming pools and water slides and things of that nature, we think about land-based, and there's always the flooring material is some sort of stone or a well-done composite or something that we don't sort of quite process. Well, that's going to be slippery because it isn't. It's designed and meant for that type of environment. But when we go on cruise ships, they're not going to have a deck made of stone. Okay, the ship will sink. Even those things can't bear that type of weight. So the materials that these things are made of, there's different names of it, bullet, things of that nature. They're very different than what you would encounter on your day-to-day sort of in your own swimming pool, your own neighborhood pool, your town pool, or anything like that. And people aren't quite ready for that and sort of the feel. And when those things get wet, it's a different biomechanical experience than one would normally expect. And that's why these things happen with such, frequency and regularity.
Yeah. And, I was just thinking too, because, we don't really talk about this every day, around the table about as far as wet decks and stuff like that. But obviously we love cruising, but, on a pool at your house, the pool deck doesn't move with the ocean either, does it?
No, it doesn't. And, they're designed with very coarse surfaces because it doesn't give, you don't get the situation where people are walking on pool decks outside of your home or again in the town pools. You never really hear of, slip and fall instances outside of a swimming pool at home or in the neighborhood. I think it hardly ever exists. But again, the surface on the cruise ship is very different than the surface at home or on land. And you've got to be aware of that. And people okay, they see it, but it doesn't compute. It doesn't register until it's too late, or they have what we call a near miss. Sometimes, somebody will be walking, and they'll lose their balance. They catch themselves, not hurt. Boy, bet you they pay attention after that. But so often as the case is the first time that somebody encounters this in a manner like this is when they get injured, and it's very unfortunate. And here's part of the problem too is the cruise lines know that this happens with a high degree of frequency and regularity. They know it because they get sued for it time and time and time and time again. And what do they do about it? They've put warning signs out at times, but warning signs are not always effective. They've tried to, every once in a while when they take the ship out of service to retrofit it or whatever, they'll try the latest and greatest in deck material. That doesn't always work. So again, the message to really have to your audience is cruise ship decks in general are vastly different than any other type of material you've ever encountered or walked on. You have to be cognizant of that. They get wet a lot, and you're talking wet with water, rainwater, mist, lotions, things of that nature. And there's not much drying that goes on unless you're talking about the ambient drying, the ambient air. It's not like somebody's walking around with a mop and a dry mop all day long on these decks. They don't. So you got to be mindful of it when you're going on a cruise. It's all the thing I tell anybody when they're going on a cruise.
It's funny, you just while you were talking, I was kind of thinking to myself, and as you go around ships, and of course I take pictures all the time for the website and different things, and there's constantly a wet floor sign that's there, in all kinds of places.
Yeah,
it's almost posted there 24/7.
Yeah, the wet floor signs are interesting because they have legal implications. I'm going to bore you for a few minutes, but okay. It's good to stay in tune with these sort of things. So a wet floor sign is a warning to people, notice to people, hey, be careful, this can be slippery when wet. But what it also does is legally it establishes notice. Put the word notice in quotes. Notice that the cruise line knows it's wet and that they need to do something about it. And just putting a wet floor sign out is not enough. They either have to have a different surface and material. Putting the wet floor sign out only relieves them of their duty to warn. They've warned, and if you don't see it or you don't pay attention to it, well, then that's on you as the guest. But it doesn't relieve them of their opportunity to dry it. It doesn't relieve them of their opportunity to have a different deck surface if this is happening with such frequency and regularity. Now, I'll give you an example. I had a case, I won't name the line or the client, but she gets out of the elevator, goes onto the top deck, and this is all caught on camera. And after she gets out of the elevator, gets onto the open air deck, there is a wet floor sign that she passes, right? This is at nighttime. It had rained. And okay, so she sees the sign, continues to walk, acknowledges the sign, was walking carefully, and still went down like a ton of bricks, and sustained a nasty fracture to her right femur, requiring multiple surgeries. So that's the thing. Like, okay, just because you're warned doesn't mean they're relieved of their responsibility, because these things, when they are slippery and when they are wet like that, some of them, it's like being on an ice skating rink.
Yeah,
right?
I believe you.
It's slippery on an ice skating rink, and if you're still trying to traverse from point A to point B, keep your fingers crossed, because there's a pretty good chance you can go down, even if you are exercising reasonable care, even if you're walking slowly, you're paying attention. There are still dynamics where you can fall. It happens all the time. And so, what we are always make a push for is that, they know how many instances have occurred on that type of decking material. And then we try and show, in a court of law, that there are other alternatives available that they haven't used that would otherwise be more protective of their guests.
And so I guess my question is, why aren't they changing the materials then? Because I'm guessing there's something that's much, much better, or there's something.
So they
right?
do it, but slowly, and they don't do it unless it's part of a larger plan to retrofit, upgrade the vessel. When they widen them and they make them bigger. I don't know exactly what that process is called, but the ships are taken out of service every once in a while. And then and only then is when they'll do it. So in the meantime, they are not going to disturb the itinerary. They are not going to disturb, look, these things are cash cow. They make a lot of money, so they're not going to take them out of service to replace the deck if that was the only thing on the checklist, right? They'll replace it and upgrade it with different material, but not until it is scheduled years later to have that type of work done. And, that's unfortunate, but that's, the corporate mantra is, everything is looked at in terms of dollars and cents.
Yeah. And so we have a thing here, a common defense, an open and obvious hazard at sea. What does that really mean?
So, let's look at it this way. When you're in a shopping mall, and you're walking from one store to another, you don't expect that the floor in the shopping mall is wet, right? You're looking in the windows. You're looking around to see, what goods you want to buy. You're not staring down at your feet. If you had water in a situation like that you slipped and fell on, no one would say that was open and obvious because you're not attendant to it. But on a cruise ship, right? It's a well-known phenomenon that these things are open air, open to the rain, open to the elements, open to the water slides, the pools, the things of that nature, people traversing water all the time. And the signs are out there. So, one of the defenses that they have is that, look, we don't have to do anything about this. We don't need to clean it up because if you use the two eyes that God gave you, you wouldn't have slipped. But some people, as I mentioned to you in the earlier example, they see it, they see the signs, but they still can't navigate it even under the best of circumstances. And you could see, I've seen enough surveillance video of instances like this where people will recognize the water, the hazard. They will see the signs. And they're not doing anything out of the ordinary. They're just walking in a careful, prudent manner. And they still go down. So it becomes a question of, right, whose fault is that, right? Is it the individual's fault for falling, or is it the cruise line's responsibility for having a substandard surface and or not cleaning up the water in the first place? Because a warning only relieves you of the duty to warn. It doesn't relieve you of your duty to maintain, your duty to dry it, the duty to have a proper walking surface. So that's where it comes up, John, and it's just something that has to be understood, and we have to plead around it and get around it with the facts.
Okay, so you have to kind of overwhelm them. I guess if you had a case, you'd have to kind of overwhelm them with the facts that they didn't have maybe they don't have logs where they actually were.
And the other good thing about these ships too is most areas are captured by surveillance. They have so many cameras on board nowadays that it's very rare in which a fall of this magnitude would occur that is not caught on the camera. So you will be able to see, the condition of the floor, number one. Number two, the way and manner in which the individual is walking. Was the individual herself negligent? Was she paying attention? Was she, stumbling around? Was she, looking at somebody else? It'll also show you, well, let's go back in time. These cameras, they go back forever. Let's take a look back 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes. How long was this water, the hazard there? And how many crew members walked past it, looked at it like that, and said, well, it's the next guy's job, right? So that's the beauty of of this surveillance footage. So one thing I would advise, in addition to, and here's some of the pointers. Obviously, one, just know that the environment is different. Know that you're in a maritime environment. Understand that the surfaces are different. They're not your normal surface at your local Y or your local pool situation. And the second thing I would tell you is, if God forbid something happens, okay, there will be, what you need to do is, number one, you'll be reporting this to the security officer on the vessel. The very first thing you need to ask is that every surveillance camera that captures that area is preserved for a 1 hour period of time, at least a 1 hour period of time. If you don't do that, the cruise lines, we have seen historically, self-edit these things. So they will determine, well, we just needed to see the incident. We did not need to preserve 5, 10, 15 minutes before this. And it brings up a whole bunch of evidentiary issues. Was it our burden to preserve it? Was it their burden to preserve it? Is there going to be adverse inferences against the cruise lines for failing to preserve the evidence, for spoliating the evidence, for not saving it and duplicating over it? So you would want to put something right on the incident report, preserve 1 hour of videotape. Okay, that's the very first thing I would say. Second thing I would tell everybody to do is, and this is hard because when somebody breaks a leg or a bone or something like that, the only thing that is going through their mind is they're in a massive amount of pain, right? That's it. And so what I'm going to say is hard to do or hard to think about, but maybe a spouse or somebody will remember this, is take a photograph, take a couple photographs of what the condition's like, because ultimately when we bring a case and a claim against one of these cruise lines, the way the law works is the individual who fell has the burden of proof. Okay, so the cruise line could just sit back there twiddling its thumbs and not do anything. We have to prove our case. And what does that mean? We have to prove that they were negligent. We have to prove that they were on notice of the condition, that it existed for a substantial enough period of time that they could and should have done something about it. Is sort of like the magic language. And the other thing too is, if the individual who finds himself in the situation doesn't know what she slipped on or caused her to fall, there is bad case law out there that will say, well, you lose. You don't get to proceed any further, because how can you meet your burden of proof if you don't even know what you slipped on, and you can't even give the defense a chance to rebut it? We're not allowed to speculate in courts. We're not allowed to have inference stacking. So as hard as it is, you want to be able to mentally process what it is that you slipped on, how big, were your pants wet? Did it wet your butt? How big was the pile or the puddle? Was it clear liquid? Was it, soda? Was it coffee? Was it tea? Whatever. These are things, the more information you have, the better. And a lot of this is going to be shown on the video, which is why it's important to get that preserved. Second thing, or the third thing I would say, is be very, very mindful of what you say to the security officers and to the medical personnel. People have a natural tendency to say, I slipped, I was clumsy, it's my fault. Oh, she's, and it's just a defense mechanism to a traumatic event. But you would be surprised, you wouldn't be surprised maybe, as to how those words will come back to bite you in the arse, right? Yeah. They will find a statement that you made to the doctor, to the security personnel, and you'll see your signature on it, and like, I said that, so you don't want to be humble, be modest, be that sort of character in those situations. you've got to be very mindful for what you say, because it's like criminal court. Anything you do say can and will be used against you in a court of law.
I was thinking too, you know, if you have an injury at like 5 o'clock this afternoon and, like, I'm fine, everything's good, because you're hoping, of course, right? And then the next day, you're really going to feel it potentially. It's always worse the next day. And of course, if it's a serious injury and it has to be surgery and, diagnostics, and then, it could be a long-term thing. You didn't know that initially, right?
Yeah. And that happens a lot with, say, back injuries. Normally when you're talking about a one of your extremities, when those things, when you're falling on it like a ton of bricks on those things, usually breaking something, tearing a ligament, you're going to know something is acutely wrong with you. But when you land on the back, that is a different type of situation, because the nerve pain is not always as apparent. Nerves get inflamed. They start to press upon the cord. Pain radiates afterwards. And so what you may think initially is, I'm just tight. I'm just, it hurts right now.
Yeah.
That could be, a displaced disc that, is bulging or herniating out into the spinal column. And, if you don't get checked out right away, and you get checked out 2 or 3 days later, or God forbid, you don't even report anything until you're off the cruise, then the cruise line's like, who are you? What?
Right.
You didn't report this. What do we know? No, we didn't save any video. Why? And then it becomes an uphill battle. You're pushing uphill the entire time. It's always best, even if you don't think you need medical attention right away, to document it, to report it. All right. Because you just never know how the body's going to respond. And if you haven't done what we suggested, John, it'll be a hard row of hoe. And look, it's going to be harder for attorneys like me to take those types of cases, because we've seen how the cruise lines view these things. They're like, who are you? You're a scammer. Nothing was reported. How do we know? It's not, we checked our video. We didn't see anything. And it's just, it becomes a problem. So try not to fall into that category, but good question, John, on that.
Yeah. I was thinking too, we haven't even talked about any extenuating circumstances. I mean, if you go on any modern cruise ship, especially the larger ones, they've got people with scooters, right? Not to mention the 15 drink per day drink package that everybody has to buy. Even if you didn't want to buy it, you have to buy it if someone in the room buys it, right? So now we've got that to contend with, right? Oh, and by the way, like we said earlier, it's a ship; it moves.
Yeah.
So, and it's got wind and rain and everything else. And by the way, there's the buffet area that's tiled, and people drop food and
all the time
down.
Yeah.
So, and like you said, lotion and the spas, and people putting suntan lotion that's going to fall on the slippery deck or fall off someone as they're walking, and so on and so forth, right? All these extenuating circumstances. And then what always surprises me when I talk to you is how difficult everything is. It's almost like you have to be a detective here, you have to literally start a report. But in the meantime, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking as someone that's been injured, that's the last thing in your mind, that I have to create like a incident report to myself, and above date and time I fell, and this, the floor, look down at the floor as I'm injured, have a someone with me, document it, take pictures, take a picture of my broken leg so they see it before it gets put back together, and all these things, right?
Boy, you've hit the nail on the head. But here's a few things there. One, these types of instances, the slips and falls, the decks, the Lido decks, the track, the people, the buffet, all these things, the number one sort of type of incident, that we find ourselves involved in, are in large part the slip and fall injuries with, real bad orthopedic fractures. That happens all the time. I mean, so, less so for things like the rapes that we have to prosecute, the medical malpractice claims that we prosecute, other sort of claims. That large bucket, it's the slip and fall type of cases. And, the interesting thing about all of that stuff is, if you have the the wherewithal to get the video, to secure some photographs, to really be vigilant about how you're reporting and document this, those cases go so much differently than the ones where, oh, it's not reported right away, or you don't remember, or it's, you weren't sure what type of shoes you were wearing, or, oh, I had 2 drinks, at lunch, and those cases, they're a quagmire. And because they're defensible. And look, I don't want to hold the cruise line liable for stuff it's not responsible for, but they view those cases as very defensible, irrespective of the negligent condition that occurred. Well, if you hadn't been drinking, this wouldn't have occurred. Or, if you didn't have, 18 things on your plate in the buffet, you would have been able to see, what was on the floor. If you weren't worried about your little kid pulling and tugging your line, you would have seen it and you would have been okay. Or if you had different footwear, you would have been okay. So, you want to try and eliminate as many of these defenses as possible, as early as possible. And, have your claim treated with the legitimacy that it really should be.
Okay. Yeah, I can see it. Just, while I'm listening to you talk about this, my brain's always working. It's like, it sounds like if you give them any little avenue, the defense will just drive a bus through it.
Yes, they have lawyers too. They have very good lawyers. I know many of them. They're fine people, but they have a job to do. Their job is to make sure you can't do your job, or me, that I can't do my job. So it's adversarial, and they start out ahead because they own the ship. They have control of the witnesses. They got the cameras. They know what happened. And, it's our job to try and figure it out and then prove it, to get past the procedural hurdles with the judge, and then ultimately convince a jury of these things. So it is a stacked, quote unquote, deck, not to, use that pun here. But look, at the end of the day, if you're a reasonable person and you're not doing anything stupid, and you're looking out for yourself as best you can, and you have one of these, life-altering situations, because they are life-altering. Don't make no mistake about it. And you can try and, cogently report this, you're going to be okay, in large part. But the other, one of the legal issues that I want to touch on too is the concept of notice and what we call prior similar incidents.
Okay.
The cruise line, again, just because, let me be clear about this, just because somebody falls and sustains a horrible injury doesn't mean you win. That's not enough. You have to prove notice of an actual negligent condition existing for a substantial enough period of time where they should have done something about it, or notice by way of prior similar instances that this has occurred with such regularity that they have a problem with the decking type of surface. Okay. So by that, what do I mean? That means, okay, in the legal process, we get to conduct discovery. That means we can investigate and find out how many times something like this has happened before on this vessel or this class of vessels, and their sister ships within a reasonable period. We always like to, shoot for 5 or 7 years, but the law is that they only have to provide us information for the last 3 years. The courts have viewed any other information beyond that as too remote. I don't quite understand that, because it's not like it means it didn't happen. It did happen. And it's just it's an accumulation of numbers. So why, if it happened 3 years and 1 day ago, don't we factor that into the analysis? Never quite understood that, but again, I don't get to make the law. So prior similar incidents are a tool that we really try and utilize to show that the decking surface is in and of itself the hazard. Because no matter what liquid is put on it, it's going to cause some type of fall or injury. Another thing I want to touch on too is, all right, so again, plaintiff has the burden of proof. So we have to prove these things are defective, or that the water was there for such a long period of time that they had notice. So again, one of the ways we do that is video. Another way we do it is through the prior similar instances. And another way we do it is by testing the surface itself. So we would hire expert witnesses, usually some sort of engineer who's got a lot of maritime or nautical experience, and they would board the vessel when it's at port. The date would be coordinated with the other side, and they would test that area of the deck. And what do you mean test? It's not like they just sit there and look at it. They have these devices, these things called tribometers, and they would sort of put down liquids. They would do it dry, they would do it wet, and they would essentially give you what the coefficient of friction is for that, and match that up with the industry standard. Now, you would think, well, that should be the end of it, right? Nail in coffin, right?
Yeah.
But I tell you, they have lawyers too, and if we hire an expert, what do? One guess. They hire their own expert too. So you get amazed that like two guys using the same type of equipment will get two different results, and each one will swear on a stack that their testing is valid, the others is not, because this guy did this and he used this and he is associating it with this industry standard and that doesn't apply. But we did it at 12 o'clock, but the incident occurred at 4 o'clock, and there's it's a different dew moisture. I mean, my God, right? This is what happens, right? These are the fights you have to have on this, and it makes me want to pull out my hair. What I have left. It's like, really? This is what we're doing? Can y'all just, look at the video and say, there was water there. Shouldn't have fallen, because, that's to me what it comes down to. But plaintiffs, defendants, their lawyers, their experts, they've bastardized this whole thing and have made they've added this element to these cases. And unfortunately, there's just no getting around it, because if you don't have the testing to say that the floor is substandard, the floor is not sufficiently safe, and its coefficient of friction fails to meet the industry standards, then your case could be dismissed from court. Again, we have the burden of proof, so we have to engage in this ridiculous process, and it's not cheap.
That's what I was thinking. It's got to be expensive.
God, you have no idea. And the experts all know it, right? And so they hold you hostage, the experts. And even my experts hold me hostage. And I'm sure the defense is getting held hostage the same way. These experts charge an exorbitant amount of money, and it's usually portal to portal, right? So if they're coming in from, I don't know, pick a state, Tennessee, right? The ship is in Galveston. So you got to bill for your time from Tennessee to Galveston to do their inspection, to get back, and then they got to write the reports. Oh my God, you can see that the cash register, right? And we on the plaintiff side, we front all our costs, so the client doesn't have to pay those at the outset, because if they did, I can tell you the grand total of people who would bring a claim would be zero. Right. So, and if they had to pay their attorneys by the hour, the grand total of people who would hire lawyers to do that would be zero. It's just people can't afford it. So what we do in this industry is we advance the costs, we advance our time, and there's no obligation to the client. If the client does not recover, does not either win their case through a settlement or a verdict, then tough luck on the attorney who took the case. So this is why you've got to really be mindful of the types of cases that we take. And so if somebody wanted to hire me, I would go through a pretty good analysis with them. Is okay, so what were you doing? Where were you going from? how big, what did you slip on? Describe the puddle for me. What was your footwear? What did you notice? And so I go through those things, because if they can't answer those questions to my satisfaction, I don't want to be in a situation where that is a type of case that gets dismissed down the road. So those are real issues. The other thing too is, when I was talking about these experts, you want to know the other thing that they do is they test the footwear, right? So yeah, they will run these tests with, oh, well, you've got, a Birkenstock, or you have a regular flip flop, or you're barefoot. Oh my God, barefoot. That's a whole different. Yeah. And so the footwear matters. I would tell everybody who's ever been involved in one of these types of cases, do not throw away your footwear. Okay. Because the defense will request it. The defense is entitled to have it examined, to have it tested. And you don't want to lose your case because you threw out your footwear. Just put it in a little plastic bag and throw it in the closet. All right. And then when you're called upon to produce it, then you produce it. But yeah, those things matter. And, flip-flops, look, they're comfortable. I get it. 1,000% get it. But they are just so not good on these things. I would, what, now that I say this out loud, I should probably invent this, or some sort of like flip-flop, but with like tread, like sandpaper tread on the bottom of it. Those strips on the nose of stairs.
Yeah.
I should invent a pair of flip-flops that has just a tape like that going down the bottom of it. You don't see it, but you're not going to slip in those things.
Yeah, well, we could include that expert that charges too much to tell us that the was it tribometers? Tribometer. Yeah.
I'll go apply for the patent tomorrow, John. You and me, we'll go ahead and do it.
Call them something about deck wear or something.
Yeah.
Not deck shoes, but deck wear or something.
Anti-skid flip-flops. That's what we'll do. But that's one type of case. Now the other things that we see too are the trips, right? The stumbling over a change in elevation or a threshold, and these are things that are unique to cruise ships. Again, these are not hotels. You know what you're getting in a hotel. You go on a cruise ship, there's so many different changes of elevation, so many little decks, platforms, watertight doors, even the elevation between the stateroom and the bathroom is different, right? Yeah. And you know how many people have tripped like that over the change in elevation from the stateroom to the bathroom. I mean,
oh wow,
just so many. Now, look, yeah. I don't generally believe that those are good cases because they're what do you do? I mean, it's not like they could redesign those. So, but for other areas of the ship, there's when you have a change of elevation, an unexpected change of elevation, they're supposed to indicate that in some manner. Watch your step. Some sort of signage, a differentiation in the color scheme, some yellow tape, something. And when they do that, surprisingly, people don't fall, people don't trip. But when they don't, as happens, and think like, indoors a lot. I find a lot of these in the theater areas, in different types of settings where there's people are going inside and it's poorly lit, and they don't see or notice a change in elevation. They go down, usually break an elbow, break a shoulder, something like that. So those are another type of case that we see with some regularity as well. And the last type of sort of, let's call it decking type of case that we see with some regularity as well is hot decks. Oh, so yeah. I wanted to talk about this for just a minute because it's an interesting topic. So, I mean, you cruise a lot, right? So, yeah. And a lot of your audiences, does everybody know that let's start with this premise. Does everybody know that cruise decks are hotter than, normal decking material? Do they have an understanding of that?
I don't think so. People
I don't
just
think
assume
so
it's
either.
hot. Oh, hot's hot. What's hotter than
Yeah.
hot, right?
Yeah. Now, I have a case. I'm not going to get too far into the facts, but it's a case in which a young woman who is a type 1 diabetic, she had her Birkenstocks on, and she goes onto to the ship and wants to just move the deck chair, reposition it different. So she kicks off her sandals for maybe 30 seconds and repositions the chairs, gets on the chair and thinks everything's okay. Mind you, this is like 30 seconds. And this is around 12 o'clock during the day. And remember, she's a type 1 diabetic, which means she can't really feel what's going on the bottom of her feet. Okay, so she doesn't know, hot from cold. She doesn't feel it. The nerve signals don't work.
Right.
And this is not a type 2 diabetic. This is a type 1 diabetic. She was this way essentially since she was 9 or 10 years old. And she's very mindful of her feet. 30 seconds. Okay. What do you think happened to her feet, John?
I don't know.
Burned, blistered, burned. And
That short period of time.
yeah, because the temperature, and we tested this, the temperature on that deck was substantially hotter than what the ambient temperature was. Think, into the it touched on 140, okay,
Wow.
which is hot, okay.
Yeah.
And you and I, if we stand on a hot deck that's 140 degrees, we know it's hot, we feel it's hot, and we get off.
Yeah, we're gonna pull away.
Before we burn our feet. But if you're a diabetic, and a lot of people who go on cruises are diabetics, let's be honest.
Yeah, lots of them.
If you take your shoes off and you don't feel it, right? 30 seconds is enough at 140 degrees to burn your feet.
Yeah, you just don't know.
You don't know. And so she didn't know until she got back into the room later that day when she looked at her feet. And, there was a whole bunch of problems afterward. The foot ended up getting infected and had to be debrided with wound care. And then it healed. And then there was another infection and another infection after that. Long story short, I won't talk about too much of what happened. She ended up having to have her leg amputated because of that, right? Just because she was, took off her Birkenstocks for 30 seconds and was repositioning her chair, because there's no signage. Now there's signage for wet floors, but there's no signage for caution hot deck. They don't do that because the cruise line takes the position, well, that's an open and obvious danger. Everybody knows that, they say. That's why I started this by asking you, what do you think? Right? And people don't think that. They don't think that the deck is going to be that much hotter. Now, do they think it'll be a little bit hotter? Sure, probably, maybe a little bit. But substantially to 140 degrees hotter, no one thinks that. And what's wrong with providing notice, providing a little bit of warning to people who are not cruise experts? This is maybe their first or second time on there. They could be from the Northeast or the Midwest or up in Minnesota or Canada. They don't know how hot it gets on these decks in the Caribbean. So they're just not familiar with that. And, for the cruise line to say, well, that's an open and obvious hazard, that we don't need to warn about that, we don't need to do anything about that, I think misses the mark. Because you're catering to not just cruise addicts. There's a little plug for you, John.
Yeah, thank you.
Cruise addicts. You're catering to people who this is the first cruise they've ever taken in their life, and you're also catering to people who are diabetic, and they should know that. So that's the amount of times that people have sustained burning episodes from the deck. It would blow your mind. But the cruise lines, they just they don't they don't think those are meritorious claims, I disagree with them. Because for me, it's pretty easy to put myself in the shoes of somebody else to say, well, I can understand why they don't see that or perceive that. Really, when I told you that fact pattern that she kicked off her shoes for 30 seconds to move the chair, did you think she did anything wrong?
No, not at all.
Right?
That's normal.
That's normal, right? But what's not normal is to have a deck reach such elevated temperatures and have that sort of as a as a risk that you're just supposed to understand. It's not that I have a problem with stuff like that, John.
And
So
it's sad too, because, for example, the day before she might have been in a more shaded area, because there's shade on the pool decks, and they've gotten better with it, I think, overall, because the pool decks, of course, the ships are much wider than they used to be, and their pools are bigger, and maybe there's water on there. It's kind of cooled it off, and so you have a little bit of between the shade and the water that may have been there the day before. You go to that same area a different area that's not shaded, that's gotten direct heat, sunlight. It's a totally different thing.
And think about it, just like what you said, is the ship's positioning is different than it was the day before, 2 days before. It could be, the exposure could be a southern exposure as opposed to, a northern exposure at that point in time. So all these things that factor in, like, again, you don't remember we talked about this last time when people go on vacation, they want to have that hair down, calmness, that no worry, that no list, that no checklist. But sad to say, again, you nobody looks out for you but yourself, so you gotta keep these things in mind. So it sounds, I'm not trying to scare people from taking cruises. I want them to take cruises. Great. I mean, it's good for me, good for my business. But all I would tell people do, and I tell everybody this when I can, is just be mindful. Again, be mindful that nobody's looking out for you but yourself. Okay. Be mindful that the surfaces are different in terms of, the risk that they pose to you and your children. And you got to be especially sort of cautious if you're elderly, because they do not, when they fall, it is substantially easier to break a bone, when you pass a certain age. So you got to be mindful of that. And there is a high mortality associated with fractures in the elderly. So it's not something as simple as, I broke an ankle. It could lead to death. And I've seen that in our practice. So you got to be, again, mindful of all of these things.
Well, if you don't mind, can I pepper you with some kind of like fast questions here?
Yep, good.
I know we're kind of running out of time, but I want to cover some things I wrote down, and I don't think you've touched on them 100%. So what areas of the ship are the most prone to slips and falls, in your opinion?
100% anything near the pool. Pools, water slides, anything associated with the pool. And I'm not talking about immediately adjacent to the pool as well. I'm talking about, where pool from inside to outside, because people traverse from outside in all the time, and they don't dry off, and they are walking inside, and you wouldn't think that inside could be wet as well, but you got to be really careful. Anything that involves a pool deck, anything around that or associated with that, by far number one hazard on the cruise ship.
And like you said, there's tile floors in the buffet where people just drop liquid and coffees and drinks and water, and you can't see it.
Yep, those are bad. Not as bad as, or I say not as frequent as the pools, but those are areas obviously they got to look out for as well.
Okay. My next quick question is, do you think cruisers should wear non-slip footwear? We kind of touched on that.
Yes, 100%. It may not be the most stylish choice, but for God's sakes, come on. I mean, again, if it were me, I'm putting like the Goodyear rubber traction on it. I'm putting the good stuff on.
I've actually got a pair of those.
Yeah, there you go. So, but yeah, wear non-skid skid footwear because these areas are not the safest in the world, and do what you can to protect yourself.
You know what? We may have talked this in the past, and you touched on it earlier about the hot decking. So if you're going to send your child, or if you actually want to partake in the slides, you have to first walk your way up across the hot deck, right? You got to get there. Then you have to go up steps and whatnot. Then you have to go down the slide. But when you get to the top of that slide, and of course, you got to go out to open deck sometimes. They're getting a little fancier with them covered. But here's the kicker. Can you go down the slide with your shoes on? No.
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, and you cannot.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing. See, I learned something new today, John.
Yeah. And now, granted, the water parks are changing, so there may be an exception. But the ones I've seen, you cannot wear footwear. So now you come out. You've walked God knows how far. Excuse my French here, but you've walked this far. You've gone down, and now you have a child or an adult that doesn't have any foot protection. Yeah. So someone almost has to coordinate that. I guess as a public service announcement, the parents or loved one needs to be with this, or partner needs to be there waiting for them when they get out.
Yeah.
You need to find the exit point and literally put those shoes on, because we've just heard about, of course, how hard it is for someone that might be diabetic of any type.
And kids.
Some of it's accident-prone kids. Luckily, kids do slip and fall a lot easier than an adult does. They kind of bounce right back up. They're kind of special in that regard. Mm-hmm. But an adult or somebody else it could be a real, life-altering injury, right?
Yeah. You bring up a good point. And I didn't know that about you can't wear the footwear going down the slides. Kind of makes sense because they don't want the interior of those things, streaked up and things of that nature. So, it goes back to, remember when you and I were talking about, the husband's role with the wife on a cruise ship, and let her have her. Dad's job keeps going. Dad should not be going down water slides. Dad should be handling the shoe inventory.
Hopefully, we just helped the dad out there. Now you got something else on your dad radar. We got to be.
Yeah. All that responsibility.
Yeah. So I've got a couple more things. What happens if you fall while on a shore excursion? And also, just on that thing. So you're going on and of course, more and more ships are doing this less, which is a good thing, is where you're tendering into shore, right? So you're going from the mothership to this little boat. A lot of times it's one of the lifeboats almost, and you have to get from the ship to the lifeboat, and that's moving like this. And the crew's really good about it, where they help you sometimes. But I've seen people almost get destroyed.
Yeah, that happens. That happens a lot. So good question about that, because I would like to touch on this. So if it is a tender vessel, the cruise line has the responsibility to maintain that and make sure that is safe. They if an incident occurs on the tender vessel, that is their responsibility, the ship to shore duty, that they've got to make sure that you don't have a type of dangerous condition on there. Now, when it occurs on the excursion or on the land or on someplace else, the cruise line generally will not have liability for those types of situations. Your cause of action, your case would be against the excursion company in that type of limited situation. The problem becomes all of these excursion companies are venued somewhere else, generally are not subject to the U.S. Court's jurisdiction, and to try and file a claim against them here is a jurisdictional nightmare, because you have to try and find enough evidence that they have availed themselves of our forum, our jurisdiction, in order for a case to proceed against them here. You would be tempted to hold the cruise line liable for what happened on the excursion. But unless the cruise line is either in some sort of joint venture partner with it on the excursion, or exhibits some sort of control and direction over it, you're not going to be able to hold the cruise line liable for what happens on somebody's slip on somebody's excursion. There are, of course, exceptions to that. And again, I'm involved in a case right now where there was a horrific injury that is sustained on an excursion. But in that case, the excursion company was sort of operating as a partner with the cruise line at the cruise line's blessing. And they were much more than just a service provider. They were close to what I would call a joint venture in the activity. And so again, very difficult and different circumstances when it occurs on an excursion versus on the cruise line. They're two completely separate things, separate defendants, separate bodies of law, separate everything. So be mindful.
I've got another follow-up on that, if you don't
Mhm.
mind. Now the big thing has been a big push. It's always been around, but it's being done in a bigger scale. So of course that means more potential problems, right? These private islands. You may have read some headlines where I think one recently owned private island, two cruisers died in the same day in separate incidences, which is awfully horrific, right? So it's obviously not a slip and fall situation, but what happens there?
All right. So a good question. Yeah, it's not exactly on that limited topic, but it's worth talking about. So in those situations, the cruise line owns and operates the island, and it is staffed with its employees, and it's following its policies and its procedures. So you have recourse against the cruise line itself for things that may have occurred, in the middle of the Caribbean someplace, and you can generally have jurisdiction of them here for that type of issue. But like everything else, just because an incident happens or somebody dies doesn't mean they're responsible. You have to prove by the greater weight of the evidence or that they were negligent somehow. And, without knowing the facts of those particular cases, whether it was a snorkeling case or an alcohol case or things of that nature, you would have to do a deep dive into what happened, the facts, the circumstances, the witnesses, and find a way to hold the cruise line, the company. I don't want to say the cruise line because it's not on the boat, but the cruise company liable for that. And that would be, the general negligence case line.
So another thing I wanted to bring up too, I know I'm on a roll today, I guess, but I know you've been traveling.
Good questions today, John.
Yeah, I know you've been traveling, so I'm
Mhm.
not sure if you saw these headlines. There was a recent headline. If you don't mind, is it okay if I bring it up?
Please, yes, go
I'm
ahead.
going to say a company name on there, but I guess it's public knowledge at this point, right? So let's see if we can pull it up here. And it says that Carnival Corporation was held liable, which they say is very rare. I guess it went to trial.
Yeah.
And it says Carnival Corporation has been found liable for injuries a Miami woman suffered while on board during a fall and has been ordered to pay her nearly $350,000 in damages. And in the body of the article, the attorney was seeking, I think, $14 million.
Yes.
Something significant. And he said that the judge didn't rule in his favor, the way he hoped.
Yeah.
But it has come to light, and it was actually what you talked about earlier. It was on a certain class of ship, and there was a threshold at those certain points. I think a metal threshold, and I've seen them. I can see them right now as I'm talking about it. They're pretty thick, and so there's a little bit of a rise between probably. I'm guessing they're watertight doors or fire doors or something.
I think that case involved a watertight door. I don't know the facts in particular, but from what I caught a summary of the case.
Okay.
I was on my flight, and I read a little bit about it. But yeah, so in that case, let me sort of break down a little bit about what happened in that case. That case went to a. Did I lose you there? Okay.
Sorry. There we go.
That case was decided by a judge, not a jury. And you may ask, well, why?
Okay. Yeah, exactly.
Well, because in that case, the plaintiff, as I understand it, was a Florida resident. So a Florida resident suing a cruise line under maritime law does not have a right to a jury trial. Other citizens from other states suing a cruise line in the Southern District of Florida under maritime law have it, but not a Florida resident. It's it's an interesting anomaly in the law. So this case was decided, both the facts of the case and the law of the case was decided by the Southern District Court judge, who, when he applied the facts of the law, determined that, yes, the cruise line was responsible for the condition because it had previously occurred and they were on notice and didn't do anything to warn of the threshold. But the damages, what the plaintiff was saying was caused by this, was not all caused by it, that she had previous conditions and things that did not and were not stemmed from the causal nexus of this incident. The damages that were caused by this were limited in nature to the extent of $350,000. Not insignificant, but if you're claiming $14 million worth of damages, you better be able to back that up. And I guess they didn't have the horses in this case. And the judge certainly found that they didn't.
Would that be the end of it? If you have is it called a bench trial?
Well, yeah, that would be the end of it. Now, the claimant in that case has a right of appeal to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeal. And their right of appeal, again, I don't know what happened in the record, but you would only be able to appeal the legal decisions, not the factual decisions, the legal decisions that the judge made in arriving at his award. That's going to be a tall order to try and have an 11th Circuit Court of Appeal somehow reverse a judge who decided both the facts and the law on in a bench trial. And I know who this judge is. I believe this was Judge Roy Altman, who's a fantastic judge. And I think he is top of the food chain, one of the best and brightest on the bench. So I'd be hard pressed to believe that he committed any what we term reversible error on appeal.
So that would be the end of it.
It should be, but I don't want to speak for the plaintiff or the plaintiff's attorney in that case. They're free to listen. It's America. People do whatever they want to do.
Can I ask you one more final question before we go? I know we're kind of at the top of the hour. Can you recap if I fall on a wet floor? Let's see here. What should I do if I get injured if I fall? If you can give us I know you kind of touched on it, but can you give us like a full list here?
If I were to give you a bullet list of what to do when you fall, number one, it's to report it always. Report it to, and I don't mean you get up and walk. I mean, you yell, you scream, you get your husband, your sister, whoever it is to go get somebody. You stay right there. Okay. You get it reported. That's number one. Number two, you take a visual mental checklist of what it is you fell in, the size, the scope, what type of liquid it is, what it was. Are your pants wet? Understand, what you were doing, be able to recall it. 3, take out your phone and snap some photographs of the condition. And 4, make sure when you report this that you request at least 1 hour of CCTV footage. And 5th, for last measure, don't say anything stupid when you go to the medical center or anybody. Just report it factually. Okay.
So just I've got to ask the follow-up. What would you consider stupid?
Oh, I can't believe I fell. That's so. I should have been paying more attention. That I qualify as stupid.
No degrading. Don't say anything against yourself.
Yeah, because look, it doesn't mean it's not a real statement. It's a defense mechanism. It's how we, like I said, how we deal with trauma sometimes. It's being modest. It's being human. Okay, we all do it. I mean, we do. So hard to fight those urges, but yeah, don't say anything stupid. Remember, anything you say will be used against you.
And when they get back to Florida or they get back home, how do they contact you? Because we know that you've talked about this many times. You have a small window to actually pursue a possible case.
You have to put them on notice within 6 months, and you have to file your lawsuit within 1 year. And attorneys like me I do not like to get involved in cases that are very close to the statute of limitations. Sooner, the better. So if somebody wants to get in contact with me, very simple. Office line is 305-424-2300, or just shoot me an email. It's very simple. tom@usinjury.law. That's tom@usinjury.law, not .com, because as I say, I don't practice commerce here. I practice law.
And we're getting fancy, Tom. I put a QR code. If you all take your phones and look at that with the camera, you can actually go to Tom's website right now. So take a look at that. We'll give it a pause here. And, if you've enjoyed Tom, he's just this way in real life. Please reach out to him. He'd love to have you as a client. Talk about if you have a case. We hope that you don't.
Exactly.
No one's chasing anything here. This is actually just great information so you can learn. Hopefully no one has to act on it, but if you do, it's always to have a good resource in your back pocket if, God forbid, something does happen. Tom, it's been such a pleasure to have you here to share this knowledge and learn about so many different things. It's always great. Until then, we'll see you next time.
Of course. Thank you, John.
Have a good night. Bye-bye. Thank you.